I am Vanessa, 32 years old, and a tech entrepreneur who built my company from nothing but determination and ramen noodles. After selling my startup last year, I quietly purchased a $5 million estate in Vermont that none of my family knows about. I was planning to surprise everyone by hosting Thanksgiving there until I got that text from my mother. This year, just your sister's family. Keeping it small. I simply replied, enjoy. They had no idea what I was about to do. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt left out by your own family. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I always felt like I was living in the shadow of my older sister, Catherine. Our modest 3-bedroom house was covered in trophies and photos celebrating her accomplishments. Catherine was everything my parents dreamed of in a daughter. She was the homecoming queen captain of the cheerleading squad and maintained a perfect grade point average, while seeming effortlessly popular. I, on the other hand, was the odd one out. While Catherine was attending football games and going to school dances, I was building computers in my bedroom and coding my first simple programs. My parents never quite understood my interests. When I would try to explain my latest coding project, my father would smile politely before changing the subject to something Catherine had achieved. Your sister just got accepted to the University of Michigan, my mother would announce at dinner, beaming with pride. And she and Brad have been dating for 6 months now. I would not be surprised if he proposes after graduation. Meanwhile, my acceptance into a computer science program at Stanford, with a partial scholarship, barely received acknowledgement. California is so far away, my mother had said. With a frown. Are you sure you would not rather stay closer to home like your sister? The pattern of being treated as an afterthought continued throughout my college years. During holiday breaks, conversations revolved around Catherine and Brad's relationship, their wedding plans, and eventually their children. My parents transformed our childhood bedrooms after we moved out. Catherine's became a beautifully decorated guest room that rarely saw use, while mine became storage space filled with Christmas decorations and old furniture. When I would share news about my academic achievements or early career milestones, my parents would listen politely before steering the conversation back to Catherine's growing family. "Did we tell you your nephew, Tyler?" said his first word. My mother would interject, effectively dismissing whatever I had been talking about. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult to endure. At Catherine's wedding, I was not asked to be a bridesmaid despite there being 8 in her bridal party, including cousins and friends she had not spoken to in years. At Thanksgiving and Christmas, I was expected to help in the kitchen while Catherine relaxed with the family. When I brought my college boyfriend home one Christmas, my parents barely made an effort to get to know him, while Brad was treated like the son they never had. Even as I began to find success in my career, my family continued to view me as somehow less accomplished than my sister. My father would introduce me as our daughter, who is still figuring things out, well into my late 20s, despite the fact that I was working for a major tech company in San Francisco. Catherine, meanwhile, was introduced as our daughter, who gave us our beautiful grandchildren and lives just 15 minutes away. The exclusion took different forms over the years. Sometimes it was being seated at the kids' table long after I had graduated college. Other times it was learning about family gatherings after they had already happened. "Oh, we did not think you would want to come all the way from California for just a small birthday dinner," my mother would explain when I would see photos on social media of a celebration I had not been invited to. One particularly painful memory was from 5 years ago when my grandmother fell ill. Catherine was called immediately, but I only found out days later through a cousin. When I confronted my mother about it, she said, "We did not want to worry you when you were so busy with work." I had flown home immediately, only to be treated like a visitor at the hospital, while Catherine was included in all medical discussions. The constant dismissal of my worth and achievements created deep-seated insecurities that I channeled into my work. If my family would not see my value, I would prove it to myself and the world. I stopped seeking their approval around my 27th birthday after hearing my father tell a family friend that he did not understand what Vanessa actually does for work, but Catherine just got promoted at the local bank. It was liberating to release the hope of ever being the favorite, or even being seen clearly by my own parents. I focused entirely on building my career and creating my own support network of friends who valued me for exactly who I was. The less I sought my family's approval, the more I thrived professionally and personally. I developed a certain peace with our distant relationship, though the hurt never fully disappeared. I made a point of still showing up for important family events, sending thoughtful gifts for birthdays and anniversaries, and calling regularly to check in. I maintained the relationship out of love and respect, but with the understanding that I would never be central to their lives the way Catherine was. That realization was both painful and freeing. My parents never visited me in California despite my many invitations. They always had a reason why it was not convenient, or why I should come to Michigan instead. Meanwhile, they vacationed with Catherine, Brad, and their children regularly. I saw the photos on social media of their trips to Disney World and summer vacations at Lake Michigan. Over time, I built a life I loved, independent of their validation. I created my own traditions, found a community that appreciated me, and pursued my passions without explanation or apology. The distance that had once felt like rejection became the space I needed to grow into myself fully. Little did my family know that the daughter they had underestimated for years was building something extraordinary. My path to success began in my freshman dorm room at Stanford. While other students were decorating their spaces with posters and fairy lights, I set up a makeshift workstation with a second-hand desk and the computer I had built myself. I was determined to make the most of my education, especially since I was working 3 part-time jobs to supplement my partial scholarship. Mornings started at 5:30 a.m., with my job at the campus coffee shop. Between classes, I tutored high school students in math and computer science. Evenings and weekends were spent answering phones at the university tech support desk. Sleep was a luxury. I rarely afforded myself, but I was driven by a vision of what my future could be. My roommate Zoe would often return from parties to find me still awake coding or studying. "You work too hard," she would say, concerned. "College is supposed to be fun too." But for me, every line of code was a step toward independence. Every all-nighter was an investment in never having to rely on my family's approval again. I graduated with honors, having already developed a small app that helped students coordinate study groups. It was nothing revolutionary, but it taught me valuable lessons about user experience and practical application of my skills. My first real venture into entrepreneurship came 2 years after college. I had been working at a mid-sized tech company, learning the industry and saving every penny I could. With my savings and a small loan from my former professor who believed in my vision, I launched a startup focused on streamlining communication for remote teams. This was years before remote work became mainstream, and the timing was not right. After 18 months of tireless effort, I had to admit defeat when we ran out of funding. The failure was devastating, but educational. I moved into a tiny apartment in San Francisco with 3 roommates to cut costs while I regrouped. We shared a converted living room divided by IKEA bookshelves for privacy, and I slept on a futon that doubled as my couch during the day. My desk was a door balanced on 2 filing cabinets, but it was enough for me to keep working on new ideas. My break came when I landed a position at Tech Forward, one of the fastest-growing companies in Silicon Valley. I started in a mid-level development role, but quickly distinguished myself by solving a major security issue that had been plaguing their main platform. Within 2 years, I was leading my own team and had caught the attention of the executive leadership. The experience and connections I gained at Tech Forward were invaluable, but I still had the entrepreneurial itch. I spent my evenings and weekends developing a new software concept focused on artificial intelligence applications for small businesses. This time, I was smarter about market research timing and the specific problem I was trying to solve. When I felt the concept was ready, I took the biggest risk of my career. I left my secure, well-paying job to found Secure Connect, pouring my entire savings into the venture. The first 6 months were terrifying. I moved to an even smaller apartment, ate ramen noodles more often than I care to remember, and worked 16-hour days. There were moments when I questioned my sanity, wondering if I should have stayed in my comfortable job or even chosen a more conventional path like Catherine. The stress took a physical toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and battled constant anxiety. During one particularly low point, I called my parents seeking some emotional support. My father answered, and after listening to my abbreviated struggles for less than a minute, he said, "Well, this is what happens when you choose such an unusual career. Catherine never has these problems at the bank." That was the last time I shared my professional challenges with my family. Instead, I leaned on my network of friends and mentors in the industry. Zoe, my college roommate who had remained a close friend, let me crash on her couch for a month when I had to give up my apartment temporarily to make payroll for my small team. My former boss at Tech Forward introduced me to potential investors. My Stanford professor reviewed my business plan and offered critical feedback. The breakthrough came when we secured our first round of serious funding. A venture capital firm specializing in AI startups saw the potential in our product and invested $2 million. That investment allowed me to hire key talent, refine our product, and begin serious marketing efforts. We expanded from 3 employees working out of my apartment to 15 people in a real office space. The following years were a roller coaster of challenges and victories. We survived a major market downturn that claimed many similar startups. We pivoted our product focus when we discovered an underserved niche in the industry. We fought off a patent infringement claim from a much larger competitor. Through it all, I led with determination and the resilience I had been building since childhood. 7 years after founding Secure Connect, we had grown to over 100 employees with offices in San Francisco, Austin, and Boston. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. The little girl who had been building computers in her bedroom while her sister went to prom was now running a company valued at over $200 million. When a major tech conglomerate approached us with an acquisition offer last year, the decision was not easy. I had built Secure Connect from nothing, and it felt like my child in many ways. But the offer was too significant to ignore $350 million with the opportunity for me and my team to continue leading the division within their larger corporate structure. After the acquisition, I found myself with more wealth than I had ever imagined possessing. My first indulgent purchase was a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in San Francisco with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. For someone who had spent years in tiny shared apartments, having a space that was entirely mine felt like an extraordinary luxury. But the purchase that brought me the most joy was finding my estate in Vermont. I had always loved the East Coast in autumn, and during a vacation last fall, I fell in love with a historic property near Manchester. The estate featured a main house with 7 bedrooms, a separate guest house, 50 acres of land with hiking trails, a pond, and stunning mountain views. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew it was special. I purchased the property for $5 million and spent another $1 million renovating and decorating it to perfection. I hired a local estate manager named Thomas to maintain the property when I was not there, which was most of the time given my work schedule. But I visited whenever I could, finding peace in the rolling hills and forests that surrounded my new sanctuary. Throughout all of this success, I had been relatively quiet about my achievements with my family. They knew I had sold my company and done well, but I never shared financial details or the full scope of my success. Part of me was waiting for the right moment to show rather than tell them what I had built. Another part was protecting myself from their potential dismissal of my accomplishments, the way they had dismissed me so many times before. I had planned to finally reveal everything by hosting Thanksgiving at my Vermont estate. I imagined their surprise when they arrived at the property, the recognition in their eyes that the daughter they had underestimated had built something extraordinary. I pictured finally earning my father's respect and my mother's pride. Even Catherine might finally see me as an equal, rather than the little sister who never quite measured up. It was not about showing off my wealth, but about finally being seen for who I had become, about taking my place in the family as a successful adult in my own right. That was the plan until my mother's text changed everything. The text arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November, as I was reviewing quarterly reports in my San Francisco office. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother, and I opened it, expecting the usual check-in about holiday plans. "Vanessa, about Thanksgiving this year. We are keeping it small. Just Catherine, Brad, and the kids. Hope you understand. Maybe we can see you at Christmas instead. I stared at the screen, reading the message multiple times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less hurtful. There was no explanation, no apology, just the casual dismissal that had characterized our relationship for years. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard as I contemplated various responses. I could ask for an explanation. I could express my hurt. I could remind her that I had already booked my flight to Michigan. In the end, I simply wrote, "Enjoy." I set my phone down and tried to refocus on work, but the familiar pain of exclusion washed over me. Despite all my success, despite all I had achieved, I was still the afterthought, the expendable family member who could be uninvited with a brief text message. My assistant Natalie noticed something was wrong when she brought in my afternoon coffee. "Are you okay? You look like you just got some bad news." I attempted a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Just family stuff. Nothing new." "Want to talk about it?" she offered, closing the door to give us privacy. I found myself sharing the text and the history behind it, something I rarely did with colleagues. Natalie listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly indignant on my behalf. "So you were just going to fly to Michigan for Thanksgiving even though they treat you this way?" she asked when I finished. "I always do," I admitted. "Every holiday, every year. I show up with gifts and a smile, help in the kitchen, listen to stories about my nephews and Catherine's job, and pretend it does not hurt when my parents barely ask about my life." "And you were planning to surprise them with the Vermont estate, after all that?" I nodded, feeling foolish now. I guess I still wanted their approval even after all these years of proving I do not need it. Natalie's expression softened. "That is understandable. But maybe this is an opportunity to break the pattern." The idea sat with me throughout the day. By evening, as I drove home to my condo, a sense of determination began to replace the hurt. I had been accommodating my family's dismissal of me for too long. This year would be different. Once home, I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. On impulse, I called my cousin Laura, my mother's sister's daughter, who had always been kind to me despite living on the opposite coast. "Vanessa, what a nice surprise," Laura answered warmly. "I was just thinking about you. Are you coming to Michigan for Thanksgiving? We would love to see you." "Actually, I was just disinvited," I explained. "Mom texted that they are keeping it small this year, just Catherine's family." A pause. "That is strange. Aunt Judy told my mom the same thing last week. She said they were just having immediate family this year." My curiosity piqued. "So you are not going either?" "No, none of us were invited. Mom was pretty hurt, actually. We have been going to their house for Thanksgiving for 20 years. Further calls to other family members revealed the same pattern. My mother's brother, Uncle Paul, and his family had been told they were taking a break from hosting extended family. My father's sister, Aunt Diane, had been told they were keeping it intimate this year due to some health concerns, though no one was actually ill. In total, more than 20 family members who usually gathered for our traditional Thanksgiving had been excluded. The only ones invited were Catherine, Brad, and their 3 children. The realization made the exclusion both more and less personal. I was not the only one uninvited, but the fact that only my sister's family was welcome still stung. My cousin Jacob, Uncle Paul's son, was particularly vocal about his disappointment. "I had already bought plane tickets," he complained. "Your mom has hosted Thanksgiving for as long as I can remember. What are we all supposed to do now?" As he spoke, an idea began to form in my mind. "What if we still had Thanksgiving together?" I suggested. "Just not at my parents' house." "Where a restaurant?" Jacob asked skeptically. "Everything will be booked by now." "I have a place," I said, making a split-second decision. "A house in Vermont with plenty of room for everyone. What if I hosted Thanksgiving this year?" There was a pause on the line. "You have a house in Vermont. Since when?" "It is a recent purchase," I explained vaguely. "It is beautiful in the fall, and there is more than enough space for all of us." Jacob's enthusiasm was immediate, and over the next hour I made similar calls to other family members. To my surprise and growing excitement, almost everyone was receptive to the idea. My uncles, aunts, and cousins from both sides of the family quickly agreed to come to Vermont instead of Michigan. By midnight, I had created a group text with everyone who had been excluded from my parents' Thanksgiving. I shared photos of the estate for the first time, earning shocked responses and excited messages. "Is this your house?" my cousin Emma texted with multiple exclamation points. "This looks like something out of a magazine," Aunt Diane wrote. "How many bedrooms did you say there were?" Uncle Paul asked practically. As the messages poured in, I felt a weight lifting. The rejection that had felt so painful hours earlier was transforming into an opportunity to create something new and meaningful. I was no longer the excluded daughter seeking a place at my parents' table. I was a host opening my doors to others who had also been left out. The next morning, I expanded my guest list beyond family. I invited Zoe and other friends who had been my support system throughout my career. I included several employees who had mentioned they had no plans for the holiday. I reached out to my neighbors in Vermont whom I had met briefly during my visits. Every acceptance brought a new wave of excitement and purpose. The Thanksgiving I had imagined sharing with my parents and sister was evolving into something potentially more significant, a gathering of people who truly valued each other's company. I called Thomas, my estate manager, to discuss preparations. He was surprised but delighted by the sudden plans. "How many guests should we expect, Miss Taylor?" "At least 30, possibly more," I replied. "And please, it is just Vanessa." "30 guests," he exclaimed. "We should start preparations immediately. Will you be handling the cooking yourself, or should I arrange for catering?" The question gave me pause. In Michigan, I would have been assigned potato peeling duty in my mother's kitchen while Catherine relaxed in the living room. Here I had the opportunity to create an entirely different experience. "Let us hire the best chef available," I decided. "I want this to be special for everyone." As I hung up, I realized I was smiling for the first time since receiving my mother's text. The painful exclusion had created an unexpected opening for joy, connection, and perhaps most importantly, the chance to define family on my own terms. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. I delegated some of my work responsibilities to focus on creating the perfect Thanksgiving gathering. This was more than just a holiday meal. It was a statement about who I had become and what mattered to me now. My guest list grew to 35 people, including family members from both sides who had been excluded from my parents' gathering. I invited cousins I had not seen in years but had once been close with as a child. I included my Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who had fallen out of favor with my parents after his divorce, but who had always been kind to me. I reached out to my grandmother, Eleanor, my father's mother, though I assumed she would be at my parents' Thanksgiving since she lived with them part-time. Beyond family, I invited friends who had become my chosen family over the years. Zoe was flying in from Seattle with her husband. 3 of my earliest employees who had been with Secure Connect from the struggling startup days confirmed they would come. I even invited my former professor from Stanford, who had given me that first loan to start my business. Each invitation included flight information with first-class tickets for those traveling from a distance. I arranged for luxury car services to transport everyone from the airport to the estate. For guests who preferred to drive, I provided detailed directions and suggestions for scenic routes through the Vermont countryside. With Thomas managing the local arrangements, we secured the services of Chef Antoine, who had worked at a Michelin-starred restaurant in New York, before opening his own catering business in Vermont. When I explained what I was trying to create, a warm, inclusive gathering that honored both tradition and new beginnings, he immediately understood the vision. "We will create a menu that respects the classic Thanksgiving dishes, but elevates them," he explained during our planning call. "And perhaps some unexpected additions to represent the unique journey that brought everyone together." I gave him complete creative freedom, asking only that he include my grandmother's sweet potato recipe if she decided to attend. It was the one dish from family Thanksgivings that held purely happy memories for me. The guest accommodations required careful thought. The main house had 7 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. The separate guest house offered 3 additional bedrooms. For the remaining guests, I reserved rooms at a luxury inn 5 minutes away. I wanted everyone to have their own space and privacy while still feeling part of the gathering. I worked with a local interior designer to prepare each guest room with personalized touches. For Zoe, I included photos from our college days and her favorite scented candles. For my cousins with children, I added baskets of age-appropriate toys and books. For my uncles who enjoyed whiskey, I placed small selections of local Vermont spirits on their nightstands. The common areas of the house were transformed with tasteful Thanksgiving decorations. I avoided the kitschy pilgrim figurines my mother always displayed, and instead opted for natural elements like gourds, pine cones, and autumn leaves artfully arranged throughout the house. A local florist created stunning arrangements featuring seasonal blooms in rich oranges, deep reds, and warm yellows. I spent hours on the phone with Thomas discussing every detail from the placement of extra seating in the great room to the selection of background music for different parts of the day. We planned activities for various age groups, including a kids' craft table yard games, if the weather permitted, and guided hikes on the property trails. The media room is stocked with films for the traditional post-turkey nap time, Thomas assured me. And I have arranged for a local musician to provide acoustic guitar music during cocktail hour. Shopping for gifts became another focus. I wanted each guest to have something meaningful to take home, not just as a reminder of the gathering, but as an expression of genuine appreciation for their presence in my life. For my cousins, I found beautiful leather-bound journals with their initials embossed on the covers. For the children, I commissioned custom stuffed animals from a Vermont artisan. For my friends and former colleagues, I selected books that held special significance to our shared history. As the RSVPs continued to arrive, all confirming attendance, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. This gathering was taking on a significance beyond what I had initially imagined. It was becoming a powerful reclamation of the holiday and what family could mean. I scheduled video calls with Thomas 3 times a week to check on progress. During one such call, he gave me a virtual tour of the estate's transformation. The dining room now featured 2 extended tables that could comfortably seat everyone together. The great room had been rearranged to create conversation areas while maintaining an open flow. The kitchen had been stocked with top-of-the-line equipment for Chef Antoine. We have also prepared the outdoor spaces, Thomas explained, panning the camera to show the stone patio where heaters had been installed to combat the November chill. The fire pit is ready for evening gatherings, and we have plenty of blankets for guests who want to enjoy the stars. I had hired a professional photographer to document the celebration, wanting to capture not just the beautiful setting but the genuine connections between guests. There would be formal group photos, of course, but I was more interested in the candid moments of joy and reunion. 1 week before Thanksgiving, I flew to Vermont to oversee the final preparations. Seeing the estate in person, now fully prepared for guests, was breathtaking. Thomas had executed every detail perfectly, from the welcome baskets in each room to the subtle lighting that made the historic home feel warm and inviting. I walked through each space, imagining my family and friends filling the rooms with conversation and laughter. In the dining room, I ran my hand along the antique table where we would all gather. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness thinking about my parents and sister celebrating separately, unaware of what they were missing. But the feeling quickly passed, replaced by excitement for the new tradition I was creating. The night before guests were to arrive, I stood on the back porch looking out at the moonlit mountains. Chef Antoine and his team were already working in the kitchen preparing items that could be made ahead. The house smelled of baking bread and simmering stocks. Thomas joined me on the porch, handing me a mug of hot cider. "Everything is ready, Vanessa. It is going to be wonderful." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I never thought I would be doing this, hosting my own Thanksgiving separate from my parents. "Family is what we make it," he said wisely. "Sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we are born into." As I sipped my cider and looked out at the property that was now mine, I realized how true that was. Tomorrow, I would welcome people who truly wanted to be here, who valued me for exactly who I was. The little girl who had never quite fit in was now creating a space where everyone would belong. Thanksgiving morning dawned with a light dusting of snow that made the estate look like something from a holiday card. I was up before sunrise, too excited to sleep, watching as the first golden light touched the distant mountains. In a few hours, my guests would begin arriving, and the house would transform from a beautiful but quiet space to a home filled with life and connection. The first to arrive were my Uncle Robert and his new wife Susan, pulling up in their car just before 10 o'clock. I met them at the front door where Thomas stood ready to take their luggage. Vanessa, Uncle Robert embraced me warmly. "This place is absolutely incredible." As I showed them around the main floor of the house, I watched their expressions of amazement with a sense of quiet pride. "Your rooms are upstairs, the blue suite at the end of the hall," I explained. "I thought you might enjoy the mountain view." "You own all of this?" Susan asked, gesturing to the expansive property visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I do," I confirmed simply. "It has been a good few years." By 11:30, cars and shuttle vans were arriving regularly. Each new group of guests entered with exclamations of surprise and delight as they took in the estate. My cousins Jacob and Emma, who remembered me as the quiet girl tinkering with computers at family gatherings, were particularly stunned. "When you said you had a place in Vermont, I pictured a cabin or something," Jacob admitted as I showed him the media room with its state-of-the-art projection system. "This is unbelievable, Vanessa." Emma embraced me tightly. "I always knew you would do amazing things," she whispered. "I am so proud of you." Her words touched me deeply. Here was the recognition and pride I had sought from my parents for so many years, offered freely by a cousin who had actually been paying attention to my journey. Zoe and her husband arrived from Seattle bearing gifts of Washington wines and handmade chocolates. "This exceeds even your usual overachievement," she teased, as she took in the grand staircase and crystal chandelier in the entryway. "Remember when we shared that tiny apartment with the bathroom door that never closed properly?" We laughed together at the memory, marveling at how far we had both come from those struggling early days in San Francisco. The reunion of family members who had not seen each other in years created a joyful buzz throughout the house. Cousins who had grown up together but drifted apart as adults reconnected as if no time had passed. Aunt Diane and Uncle Paul, who had been avoiding each other since a disagreement at a family wedding 3 years ago, were spotted chatting amicably in the library. Children raced through the hallways on a scavenger hunt Thomas had organized to keep them entertained. The sounds of their laughter mixed with conversations and background music to create the soundtrack of a truly happy gathering. Chef Antoine and his team worked their magic in the kitchen, occasionally emerging to pass appetizers that were received with appreciative murmurs. The aroma of roasting turkey, fresh herbs, and baking pies filled the air, making the house feel even more welcoming. At 2 o'clock, with most guests having arrived and settled in, I invited everyone to the great room for a welcome toast. Standing before the massive stone fireplace, glass of champagne in hand, I looked out at the faces of people who had shaped my life in different ways. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. "Some of us have known each other our whole lives. Others are newer friends who have become family in different ways. What matters is that everyone here today has chosen to be present to create something meaningful together." I did not mention my parents or the circumstances that had led to this alternative gathering. Instead, I focused on gratitude and new beginnings. Today is about appreciation for the connections we share and the new traditions we are creating together. I am honored to welcome you all to my home. As glasses were raised in response, the front door opened unexpectedly. Thomas hurried to see who the late arrival might be, and returned moments later with an expression of surprise. "Miss Taylor, your grandmother is here." A hush fell over the room as my grandmother Eleanor entered, assisted by her part-time caregiver Maria. At 87, she moved slowly but with the same dignity and grace that had always characterized her. I set down my glass and crossed the room to embrace her. "Grandma, I did not think you would be able to come." I helped her to a comfortable seat near the fire. She patted my hand affectionately. Did you think I would miss my favorite granddaughter's first time hosting Thanksgiving? When I heard what you were doing, I told your father I had a headache and needed to stay home. Then Maria helped me arrange transportation. Her eyes twinkled mischievously. Sometimes at my age, you have to be a little sneaky to do what you want. The gathering continued with renewed energy after my grandmother's arrival. She held court in the great room, sharing family stories many had never heard before. Several of my cousins sat at her feet like children at story time, despite being in their 30s and 40s. At 4 o'clock, Thomas announced that dinner was ready. We moved to the dining room where the tables had been set with fine china, crystal, and silver. Each place marked with a hand-calligraphed name card. Candles and fresh flowers ran the length of both tables, creating an atmosphere of elegant warmth. Chef Antoine presented each course with a brief explanation of the ingredients and preparation. The traditional turkey had been brined for 3 days before roasting. The stuffing featured local mushrooms foraged from the Vermont woods. Even the cranberry sauce was special, made with berries harvested from a bog on the property. For my grandmother's sweet potato dish, Chef Antoine had followed her recipe exactly then. Presented it to her for approval before serving. Her smile of satisfaction was one of my favorite moments of the day. Conversation flowed as freely as the wine, with none of the tension or awkward silences that often characterized my parents' Thanksgiving table. Here there was no hierarchy, no favorites, no comparisons between cousins or siblings. Everyone was valued equally as a guest in my home. After dinner, as dusk fell over the mountains, we gathered on the back patio where the heaters and fire pit kept us comfortable despite the November chill. The photographer captured candid shots of guests wrapped in blankets, warming their hands with mugs of hot cider or glasses of whiskey, faces illuminated by firelight as they shared stories and laughter. My former professor raised his glass in an impromptu toast. To Vanessa, who has always seen possibilities where others saw obstacles. You have created something truly special here today, just as I knew you would when you first came to me with your business plan all those years ago. As the evening progressed, someone suggested we each share what we were thankful for this year. The tradition took on new meaning in this gathering of people who had chosen to be together, despite other options. Answers ranged from heartfelt to humorous, but the common thread was appreciation for authentic connection. When it was my grandmother's turn, she looked directly at me. I am thankful for brave people who create their own path when the usual road does not work for them. And I am thankful to be here to witness it. Later, as some guests drifted to the media room for football games, and others helped children get ready for bed, I found a quiet moment alone with my grandmother on a window seat overlooking the now dark mountains. I am so proud of what you have built, Vanessa, she said softly. Not just this beautiful home, but the life you have created on your own terms. Thank you for coming today, I replied, holding her frail hand in mine. It means everything to have you here. She squeezed my hand. Your parents and Catherine do not know what they are missing. But I suspect they will find out soon enough. I raised an eyebrow questioningly. My grandmother smiled. Emma has been posting photos all day. Your cousin Patrick has been live streaming parts of the dinner. In this age of social media, nothing stays private for long. She was right, of course. Throughout the day, guests had been taking photos and videos, sharing them on various platforms with captions like "Best Thanksgiving Ever" and "Who Needs Michigan when you have Vermont?" I had been too busy hosting to think about the implications, but now I realized that my parents would inevitably see evidence of our gathering. That night, after the last guests had retired to their rooms or the nearby inn, I sat alone in the library with a final glass of wine. The house was quiet but not empty, filled with the lingering energy of the day's celebrations. For the first time in my adult life, I had experienced a holiday that felt completely right, surrounded by people who saw and appreciated me for exactly who I was. I opened my phone and scrolled through some of the photos that had been shared. There were beautiful shots of the estate, the food, and most importantly, the genuine joy on people's faces. In one particularly moving image, my grandmother was seated in the center of a group of my cousins, all looking at her with expressions of love and attention as she told a story. As I was about to set my phone down, a notification appeared. It was a text from Catherine Nicehouse. Did not know you were so loaded. Mom and Dad are freaking out. I smiled to myself, turned off my phone, and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, I would sleep peacefully in the home I had created, surrounded by the family I had chosen. The day after Thanksgiving dawned clear and cold. Many guests chose to sleep in after the festivities, but I was up early enjoying coffee in the kitchen with Chef Antoine as he prepared a breakfast buffet. We were discussing his plans for using the leftover turkey when my phone began buzzing repeatedly with incoming calls and texts. I glanced at the screen to see multiple notifications from my mother, father, and Catherine. I silenced the phone and set it aside, determined to focus on my remaining guests rather than family drama. This weekend was about new traditions and connections, not reopening old wounds. After breakfast, some guests departed with warm hugs and promises to stay in touch. Others accepted my invitation to stay the weekend, eager to explore the property and nearby Vermont attractions. My grandmother announced her intention to stay as long as you will have me, dear, which delighted me immensely. By mid-afternoon, as I was organizing a group hike to the pond, my phone had accumulated 15 missed calls and 27 text messages. Zoe noticed my distraction and took over guiding the hikers, allowing me a moment of privacy to deal with the situation. In the quiet of the library, I finally opened the messages. They ranged from confused to angry, with my mother demanding explanations and my father expressing hurt and bewilderment. Catherine's texts were the most pointed, accusing me of showing off and trying to make us look bad. The most recent text from my mother read, "We need to talk. Call immediately." I took a deep breath, considering my options. I could continue ignoring them, which would only escalate tensions. I could respond by text, which seemed inadequate for the conversation that clearly needed to happen. Or I could call and face the situation directly. With a sense of calm determination that would have been impossible for me even a year ago, I chose the third option. I called my mother's number and put the phone on speaker so I could pace around the library as we talked. She answered on the first ring. "Vanessa, finally. What in the world is going on? Why are there pictures all over Facebook of you hosting Thanksgiving at some mansion in Vermont, and why is your grandmother there?" Her rapid-fire questions had the familiar tone of accusation that had characterized so many of our interactions over the years. But this time, instead of feeling defensive or apologetic, I felt steady. "Hello, Mom. Yes, I hosted Thanksgiving at my home in Vermont. I invited family members and friends who did not have other plans after you decided to have just Catherine's family this year. But this was supposed to be a small, quiet Thanksgiving," she sputtered. "Just immediate family." "Catherine's immediate family," I corrected gently. "Not mine. Not Uncle Paul's or Aunt Diane's or Cousin Jacob's. So, we created our own gathering." There was a pause before she continued, her voice slightly less certain. "You should have told us you bought a house. And such an expensive one. The family is saying it is worth millions. Where did you get that kind of money?" The question revealed so much about how little they knew of my life and career. "Mom, I sold my company last year for $350 million. I mentioned it at Christmas, but you and Dad were busy helping Tyler open his presents." Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear her recalibrating her understanding of her younger daughter. "Your father wants to speak to you," she said finally, and I heard the phone changing hands. "Vanessa." My father's voice was gruff with emotion. "What is this about? Are you trying to make some kind of point by taking the family to Vermont instead of coming home for Thanksgiving?" His framing of the situation was so telling, the assumption that I must be acting out of spite rather than simply creating something positive from their rejection. "No, Dad. I am not trying to make a point. When Mom texted that I was not welcome this year, I made other plans. It turned out a lot of the family had received similar messages, so I invited them to join me. It was a wonderful gathering." "Not welcome?" He sounded genuinely confused. "That is not what we meant at all. We were just trying to keep it small this year." Catherine has been stressed with the kids, and your mother thought a quieter holiday would be good for everyone. A quiet holiday that included 7 people, just not me, I pointed out, keeping my voice even. Dad, this is not the first time I have been excluded or treated as an afterthought. It has been happening my entire life. That is ridiculous, he protested. We have always treated you and Catherine exactly the same. I could have argued, could have listed dozens of examples that proved otherwise, but I recognized the conversation was not really about Thanksgiving. It was about years of family dynamics that could not be resolved in one phone call. I think we have different memories of my childhood, I said diplomatically. But that is not what matters now. What matters is that I created a beautiful Thanksgiving celebration with people I care about in my home that I am proud of. I am not asking for an apology or trying to make anyone feel bad. I am just living my life on my terms. Catherine's voice suddenly broke in, and I realized I had been put on speakerphone as well. But why did you have to post all those photos? Everyone is talking about how amazing your house is, and what a great time they had. It makes our Thanksgiving look pathetic in comparison. There was the crux of it, not that I had been excluded, but that I had refused to be diminished by the exclusion. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I had definitively one-upped my perfect older sister, and she did not know how to process it. I did not post any photos, Catherine. Our cousins and friends did because they had a good time and wanted to share it. That is what people do on social media. But you invited Grandma, she accused. She told us she was not feeling well and could not come to our dinner. She lied to be with you instead. I smiled at that, picturing my grandmother's mischievous expression as she had described her escape plan. Grandma made her own choice. Maybe she wanted to see my new home, or maybe she was curious about why so many family members were gathering in Vermont. You would have to ask her. As if on cue, the library door opened and my grandmother entered, using her walker but moving with purpose. Is that my son and his family on the phone? Put them on speaker, Vanessa. I have something to say. I adjusted the volume and nodded to her. Robert, Judy, Catherine, this is Eleanor. I want you to listen carefully because I will not repeat myself. What you did, excluding Vanessa and then acting surprised when she created something beautiful without you, is exactly why I chose to be here instead of there. This family has taken this child for granted for far too long, always placing her second to her sister. I have watched it happen year after year, and I have been just as guilty by not speaking up sooner. My grandmother's voice was strong and clear, carrying the authority of her 87 years. Vanessa has built an extraordinary life through her own hard work and determination. She has a successful career, a beautiful home, and the generosity of spirit to share it with others. Instead of being jealous or defensive, you should be proud. I certainly am. There was stunned silence from the phone. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, moved beyond words by my grandmother's defense. Finally, my father spoke, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Mom, I think you are exaggerating. We have always loved both our daughters equally. Love is not just words, Robert. It is attention. It is interest in someone's life and achievements. It is making space at your table and in your heart. By that measure, you and Judy have failed Vanessa repeatedly. My mother's voice broke in, tearful now. That is not fair. We have always supported both girls. When was the last time you visited Vanessa in California? My grandmother challenged. When was the last time you asked detailed questions about her work or her life? When was the last time you put her first, even once, over Catherine and her family? The silence that followed was answer enough. I am staying in Vermont through the weekend, my grandmother continued firmly. Next week when I return, we will have a family discussion about how things need to change going forward. For now, I suggest you all reflect on the choices that led to this situation. With that, she nodded to me to end the call. I tapped the screen, and the library fell quiet except for the crackling of the fire. You did not have to do that, Grandma, I said softly, moving to stand beside her. She patted my hand. Yes, I did. It was long overdue. She looked around at the beautiful room with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable leather chairs. Now, I believe some of your guests were planning a hike. An old woman like me might prefer to sit by the fire with a good book if you have a recommendation. I selected one of my favorites from the shelf and helped her settle into the most comfortable chair before rejoining my guests outside. As we walked the trails around the property, I felt lighter somehow, as if my grandmother's words had released me from a burden I had carried for years. Later that evening, as we gathered for a casual dinner of Thanksgiving leftovers, reimagined by Chef Antoine, my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Unlike her earlier messages, this one seemed written in a moment of vulnerable honesty. I have always been jealous of you, Vanessa. Your freedom, your brilliance, your ability to create your own path. I took comfort in being the favorite because it was the only area where I felt I could win. I am sorry for the role I played in pushing you aside. Congratulations on all you have achieved. You deserve it. I read the message twice, surprised by the admission and unsure how to respond. It was the first time Catherine had ever acknowledged the dynamic between us, the first crack in the perfect sister facade she had maintained throughout our lives. Before I could reply, another text arrived, this one from my father. Your grandmother is right. We have not been fair to you. I did not realize how successful you had become, because I never really asked. I am proud of you, Vanessa. I should have told you that long ago. And finally, from my mother, the house looks beautiful in the photos. Perhaps we could visit sometime and see it in person. I set the phone down without responding immediately, wanting to sit with these unexpected developments and decide how I truly felt before engaging further. The path to healing family relationships would be long and uncertain, requiring more than a few apologetic texts. But perhaps this disruption of the status quo was a necessary first step. For now, I rejoined my guests at the dinner table where laughter and conversation flowed freely among people who had chosen to be together. Whatever happened with my parents and sister in the coming weeks, I had created something valuable here, a new definition of family based on mutual respect and genuine connection. That felt like the most meaningful Thanksgiving gift of all. As November gave way to December, the Vermont estate returned to its quiet state. The last guests had departed, leaving behind memories of laughter, connection, and new traditions. I returned to San Francisco temporarily to oversee end-of-year business matters, but my thoughts often drifted to the approaching Christmas holiday and the uncertain state of my family relationships. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, communication with my parents and Catherine had been cautious but consistent. Short texts evolved into longer emails and eventually phone calls that felt different from our previous interactions. There was a tentative quality to our conversations, as if we were all feeling our way through unfamiliar territory. My grandmother, true to her word, had facilitated a family meeting upon her return to Michigan. She later reported to me that difficult truths had been spoken, tears had been shed, and commitments to change had been made. Whether those commitments stick remains to be seen, she added pragmatically. But awareness is the first step toward transformation. As Christmas approached, I faced a decision. I could spend the holiday with friends in California, travel somewhere exotic, or extend an invitation to my immediate family to join me in Vermont. Despite the progress in our communications, I hesitated, protective of the peace I had found in creating my own traditions. In the end, it was my grandmother who tipped the scales. Healing happens in small steps, dear one, she said during one of our regular phone calls. You have the opportunity to rebuild something on new foundations. That does not mean forgetting the past or pretending the hurt never happened. It means creating space for something different to grow alongside the memory of what was. With that wisdom guiding me, I sent a carefully worded email to my parents and Catherine inviting them to spend Christmas at my Vermont estate. This is not about erasing what has happened between us, I wrote. It is about the possibility of something new. I would like you to see my home and share in this part of my life if you are willing. Their acceptance came within hours, along with questions about travel arrangements and what to pack for Vermont in December. I arranged for first-class flights and car service from the airport, the same considerations I had extended to all my Thanksgiving guests. On December 23rd, I stood in the entryway of my home watching through the windows as the car carrying my parents and Catherine approached up the long driveway. Brad and the children had remained in Michigan with his family this year, making this a gathering of just our original family unit for the first time in many years. As they stepped from the car, expressions of amazement already visible on their faces as they took in the scale and beauty of the property, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was lingering hurt, certainly, but also a cautious hope that something valuable might emerge from the painful revelations of the past month. Thomas opened the door to welcome them, taking their coats and luggage with professional courtesy. My mother entered first, her eyes widening as she absorbed the grand entryway with its crystal chandelier and sweeping staircase. "Vanessa," she breathed, "this is absolutely stunning." My father followed, unusually quiet as he looked around. Catherine came last, her expression a mixture of awe and something that might have been regret. "Welcome to my home," I said, simply stepping forward to guide them into the great room, where a fire blazed in the massive stone fireplace, and the Christmas tree stood decorated in the corner, reaching nearly to the 18-foot ceiling. "You live here alone?" my father asked, finding his voice at last. "Thomas and his wife Maria live in the caretaker's cottage on the property," I explained. "And I have regular staff who maintain the house and grounds. But yes, this is my personal residence, though I split my time between here and San Francisco." "It is like something from a magazine," Catherine said, running her hand along the back of a leather sofa that probably cost more than her entire living room set at home. "Would you like a tour?" I offered, and they nodded, still seeming slightly dazed by the tangible evidence of my success. As I led them through the house, pointing out features and sharing stories about how I had found or selected various elements, I watched their perceptions of me visibly shifting. Each room revealed another facet of my life and taste that they had never bothered to discover through conversation. The library, with its carefully curated collection, reflected my intellectual interests. The state-of-the-art kitchen spoke to my newfound love of entertaining. The art on the walls showed my appreciation for beauty and creativity. In my home office, my father paused before the framed magazine covers featuring articles about my company and achievements. "Forbes 30 Under 30, he read from one headline. "Tech visionary revolutionizes industry" from another. "Why did you never tell us about any of this?" he asked quietly. I considered the question carefully before answering. "I did try, Dad. Many times. But there was always something more important happening with Catherine or the kids. After a while, I stopped trying." He nodded slowly, the painful truth of my words reflected in his expression. "I am sorry we did not listen." By the time we reached the upper floor with its bedroom suites, something had shifted in our dynamic. My parents and sister were seeing me clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as the afterthought daughter or the little sister who never quite measured up, but as a successful, independent woman who had built something remarkable. I showed them to their rooms, each prepared with the same thoughtful touches I had provided for my Thanksgiving guests. "Dinner will be at 7, I explained. "Thomas has prepared something special for our first night together." Left alone to settle in, I retreated to my own suite, needing a moment to process the emotional complexity of having my family in my space. It was strange and somewhat vulnerable to have them here in the sanctuary I had created, apart from their judgment and expectations. When we gathered for dinner, the conversation was initially stilted, all of us aware of the unspoken history between us. But as the excellent meal progressed and the wine flowed, the atmosphere gradually relaxed. My mother asked questions about my work that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. My father shared stories from his own career that he thought might relate to my experiences in business. Catherine spoke with surprising openness about her own insecurities and the pressure she had felt to maintain her status as the successful daughter. "When you left for Stanford, I was secretly terrified," she admitted. "I knew you were smarter than me, more driven. I was afraid you would outshine me, and then I would lose the one thing I felt I had, being the daughter Mom and Dad bragged about. So you made sure to keep me in my place," I observed, not accusingly but seeking understanding. She nodded, looking ashamed. "It was not always conscious, but yes. and Mom and Dad made it easy because they were so focused on my life, my kids. We failed you both in different ways, my mother said quietly. Catherine, we put too much pressure on you to be perfect. Vanessa, we did not give you the attention and recognition you deserved. I see that now, and I am truly sorry. The conversation continued late into the evening, moving from the dining room to the great room where we sat before the fire. There were difficult moments and uncomfortable truths, but also laughter and memories that had been positive despite the complicated dynamics. It was not a complete healing, but it was a beginning. The following days brought additional moments of connection and revelation. We explored the property together, bundled in winter coats for walks along the snowy trails. We played board games before the fire and watched Christmas movies in the media room. My father and I had a long conversation about investments and financial planning, his area of expertise finally finding relevance in my life. My mother helped me wrap gifts for the staff and local families I had adopted for the holidays. On Christmas morning, as we gathered around the tree to exchange presents, I was struck by how different this felt from holidays past. There was an awareness and intentionality that had been missing before, a sense that we were all making an effort to see and hear each other more fully. The gifts reflected this new understanding. Rather than the generic clothing or bath sets my parents usually gave me, they had selected books by authors I loved and artwork that complemented my home's aesthetic. Catherine had commissioned a painting of the San Francisco skyline from a local Michigan artist, a thoughtful nod to my West Coast life. For my part, I had chosen gifts that acknowledged their interests and needs rather than their expectations. For my father, rare first editions of financial history books he had mentioned wanting. For my mother, a weekend spa retreat with her friends that she had been putting off as an unnecessary luxury. For Catherine, a family portrait session with a renowned photographer and a weekend away for just her and Brad while I would take care of their children. As the day progressed into evening with Christmas dinner served and crackers pulled, my mother raised her glass in a toast. To new beginnings, she said, her eyes meeting mine with genuine warmth. And to our remarkable daughter Vanessa, who had the courage to create her own path and then invite us to walk it with her for a while. The acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It was what I had wanted for so long, simple recognition of my worth and place in the family. The fact that it had taken such dramatic circumstances to achieve it was both sad and somehow appropriate. Later, as we said our goodnights, my father hugged me with uncharacteristic emotion. "I am so proud of what you have built," he said gruffly. "Not just this house, but the life you have created. I wish I had told you that years ago." The rest of their visit passed in a similar vein of cautious reconnection. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that threatened to reassert themselves, but we were all more aware now, more intentional about creating something healthier. When they departed 2 days after Christmas, the goodbyes were warmer and more genuine than any I could remember from previous visits. My mother hugged me tightly. "Thank you for giving us another chance," she whispered. "We do not deserve it, but I am grateful." As their car disappeared down the driveway, I stood in the doorway reflecting on the journey of the past month. What had begun with a painful exclusion had led to a profound shift in my family dynamics and my own relationship with belonging. I had discovered that creating my own traditions and defining family on my own terms was not just a reaction to rejection, but a powerful act of self-authorship. The following days brought a flurry of texts and emails from extended family and friends who had been part of the Thanksgiving gathering, many asking if it would indeed become an annual tradition. Their enthusiasm confirmed what I already knew, that the connections formed or strengthened during that weekend were worth nurturing. As the new year approached, I made decisions about my time and priorities that reflected the lessons of recent months. I would maintain my independence and the life I had built, continuing to host inclusive gatherings at my home. I would also make space for a new kind of relationship with my parents and sister, one based on mutual respect rather than old patterns of favoritism and exclusion. The path forward would not be without challenges. Decades of family dynamics could not be transformed by one difficult conversation or even one meaningful holiday. But awareness had been created that could not be undone, and with it the possibility of something healthier and more authentic. Standing on my back porch on New Year's Eve, watching the last sunset of the year paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey from exclusion to empowerment had been painful at times, but ultimately liberating. I had discovered that true belonging comes not from being invited to someone else's table, but from creating your own and welcoming those who value your presence. The little girl who had built computers in her bedroom while longing for her parents' attention had grown into a woman capable of building not just successful companies but meaningful connections. The pain of being the afterthought daughter had transformed into the strength to define family on my own terms. And in that transformation was the most valuable lesson of all, that sometimes the most beautiful traditions arise from the courage to create something new from the ashes of rejection. Have you ever had to create your own sense of belonging when you felt excluded by family or friends? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to share more journeys of personal growth and family dynamics. Thank you for being part of this community where we can share our truths and support each other. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we are born into. Wishing you all holidays filled with genuine connection and the courage to create your own traditions when necessary.